Hi, welcome to People, Planet, and Profit. My conversations with the innovators around the world who are making retail really a better place today. These companies, these leaders, these innovators, like the one you're going to meet today, Marcella Larsen, they are working with companies to catalyze change so that companies can be more profitable, more sustainable, and in this case, in Marcella's case, Marcy, use tech for good. Today, you're going to hear a really fascinating conversation. So, Marcy is based in Australia. She lives in Sydney. We met years ago when I was the president of QFC Grocery up in Seattle as part of the Kroger Group. Marcy and a group of her folks from Microsoft, where she was working at the time, came and toured one of our innovation stores, one of Kroger's innovation stores that I had the honor of leading and running when we were really coming out with first generation shelf edge technologies. So Marcy and I met about a decade ago, and we've stayed in touch ever since. She's a dynamic leader. And today we're going to talk about the new company she just started in Australia called the Woven Group, where it's she and a few of her colleagues from the past have come together to create a service oriented company that really helps coach companies through their technology journey. So today we're going to hit on a few things. I asked Marcy to cover her background, which I find fascinating, what she will kind of say, sort of stumbled into technology as a massive career, and she's so pioneering in it. She's going to talk about what she and her Woven Group partners are focused on with CLV, Customer Lifetime Value, really newly emerging gap in how companies are running today. And you're going to hear more. You're going to hear about why here in just a couple of minutes. We're going to touch on something she calls being the need for companies to become data ready, having the infrastructure set up in their company so that they can bring in the right tech, whether it's AI, Gen AI, et cetera, to innovate and grow and scale their company. And we're going to end on a topic that I really love because it involves travel, and that's some of her recent retail touring. And Marcy really talks about how Southeast Asia is burgeoning as the crossroads of massive retail growth. She specifically talks about Singapore and South Korea. So I hope you find this conversation as fascinating as I do. So thanks, and let's get started. Welcome, Marcy. It is so wonderful to see you. It looks like you are in what I imagine is wintry Melbourne today.
Wintry.
So, well, wow, that's pretty wild because I'm here in my office in Austin, Texas, where it's anything but. I think we got up to 105 today, but for us, that's not too bad. But
wow. Yeah, I know we need to do an exchange, Suzy, because I know you love Australia, but I believe you were more of a Sydney native in your time, and we would know very well there's a rivalry between these two locations. But this is the capital of retail, which is quite aligned to the theme we're going to talk about today as well.
Perfect timing. So everyone, you heard me talk about how excited I am to welcome Marcella to our podcast. Marcy, is it all right if I can call you Marcy from the audience?
Yeah. Marcella's my keynote name.
All right, Marcella is a keynote name. Well, I'm Suzy, so I'm thrilled to have you here. Just a quick note, we met, I think it's fascinating that we met through our respective roles at the time. I was president with Kroger, running QFC Grocery up in Seattle, and you were with Microsoft, but actually stationed in Australia, correct?
Yes.
At the time. And that was pretty cool. You guys came and did a retail tour and saw some of the technology that Kroger was leaning into at the time with fixed shelves and lighted shelves and everything that's kind of the precursor to a lot of what the AI and computer vision companies are doing today, companies like Fusion, for instance. So anyway, it was terrific to meet you. And who would know, I think it's almost been a decade down the track that we're still in constant collaboration.
Yeah. And Suzy, what I loved about what you were showcasing and sharing with other retailers in such an open and authentic way, not even the technology, but just the spirit of the test and learn that you had at Kroger at that time and your willingness to embrace it and share your learnings. And that was very rare then. We were all trying to encourage more experimentation and test and learn, which set the stage really nicely for this era we're in right now with Gen AI.
Which I think, frankly, is I mean, I'm just so excited. Every day I get up, I think, wow, what new exciting thing is going to happen today? Because with this technology, we can take our creativity and put it to use quicker, faster, and more efficiently than we could ever do before. So, all right, well, without getting me off down on that track, what I love to talk about, would you mind taking a few minutes, talk a little bit about yourself and your background? If you want to pre Microsoft or post, but you've had an incredible career thus far and really championed innovation both here in the US and Australia and around the world.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure I look I look at it that way, kind of my accidental career after university. But I, like many of us, even started in retail as a part-time role in university, actually at Abercrombie and Fitch before they transformed into what we know them as today. But I graduated and had this internship through a French organization called APAC. Some of you may have been involved. And I was the first trainee in the world to go to South Korea. So my focus in university and passion was on globalization and trade. So I actually got to put that to work in a so-called role as a commodity trader. Although really what I was doing was understanding tariffs and trade and how to do spot buying to basically ship around polypropylene and polyethylene and then package it up. So I learned a lot at a young age about that. And it wasn't what I expected at all when I was studying in university, but I guess that's how our careers go. And that led me to tech. So I came into Microsoft with that specialty, starting truly in the operations and supply chain and treasury and tax. So was dealing with that emerging world and changing the world in a way with how we would tax and duty intellectual property. So it's quite niche, but I could see in tech, the place to be was really in product management. So I kind of set out on that goal and landed a bulk of my career working in the space of data and what became AI. So SQL Server was a product I had under my belt for over a decade, both in the US and brought me to Australia, along with kind of a niche product, BizTalk Server, that brought me into the world of APIs as well and integration, which wasn't really a sexy thing then, but it certainly is now. But
we couldn't run business without that.
yeah. So I ended up taking a role in Australia because I lived in Australia as a kid. And I just had that draw card to want to return to that part of the world. As you know, it's infectious. I think, Suzy, you lived down here for a while too, right?
Yeah, twice. I've moved there, lived there twice. I would happily come back again. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, it's a great sandbox and just a amazing lifestyle. And I love the working culture here, very impact driven. So was fortunate enough to move down here and take on a Microsoft role around product management for the application platform area. And after a few years there, I suddenly found myself as the retail industry lead in a new country with not that much of an external network. So I did set about putting a plan in place, get a mentor. How do I actually become part of the fabric of retail? And I was fortunate enough to have a mentor from one of the larger shopping owner operators, Westfield, now known as Center Group, bring me on board for a global study tour. I was able to curate the experience in Seattle and travel to 6 cities around the world with key leaders from retail. And that just opened my mind, blew my mind away. And not only in immersive learning, but in real time with other people, I would say that was a life-changing moment in my career and giving me that outside perspective. So I spent probably about another 6 years in that role, evolving it. The industry was moving into verticalization at the time. So I also got to collaborate very closely with my peers and thinking about how we're transitioning. How do we work with the sales and marketing team, become more focused on the industry itself? And I actually was headhunted out to Salesforce for my dream role on a global team. That was at the tail end of COVID. Some would say after almost 3 decades at Microsoft, what are you doing taking on a new role? But for me to be able to learn more around marketing automation, e-commerce, the whole customer experience space was an incredible opportunity. And unfortunately for me, a year and a half in, there was a lot of turmoil with the overhiring that was happening in tech and being on a global team with hostile investors coming in play and Mark Benioff's group. I was part of kind of stripping out a lot of the verticalization that had happened. But I thought, I'm going to give my own business a go and kind of continue on this passion that I have for AI and verticalization and a new way of learning and looking at things from all of these patterns I've seen working in the retail space and coming at it from the technology side as well. And for Woven Group, with some other key co-founders, where we could bring in that outside in perspective to technology companies, but also retailers. So we saw a real gap in the market around customer lifetime value, probably a year ahead of our time. Just had a survey come out in Australia showing that that is a huge skills gap, particularly for the CMO, and a metric that is not classically on a lot of our scorecards here. So it's even just
Right.
social that.
Yeah, sorry, not just in Australia, but I would say the same thing here in the US and North America and Europe. I don't hear that mentioned as a really leading indicator, a critical KPI. And so you're absolutely prescient, as always, and pioneering, I think, to be focused on that.
And that just opens up a whole world because once you start to dive into customer lifetime value, sort of start to question some of the cohorts that have been set up. You start to think about very interesting things like how do we think about the customer lifetime value for Gen Z? Do we have enough data? How can we find that predictable? And what about Gen A? So it's been a really fascinating world, and a lot of times it's just evolved some other new projects that were, we'll call them unintended consequences. So I continue to learn. I would say that's my red thread throughout my career, having to learn Korean when I moved to Korea, having to learn AI. It's been fascinating and giving me new perspectives. And also looking from the outside now, I can be more agnostic on the tech.
Yeah.
And as you pointed out, Suzy, it's this learning every day and this new world we're in. And what's the differentiation in what I call the hyperscalers? So the Googles, the AWS, the Microsofts, what are they providing? What's their point of view? How does the rest of the industry start coming together? And I have to say, I'm having to spend a couple of hours each day just keeping up with this so I can be relevant and fresh. But it's been absolutely delightful to kind of think about, okay, now I can work with any tech. What would I do?
Yeah.
And what's the unique considerations in the retail and CPG industry? Because they're
You interact with Marcy more, the chief merchants or the chief digital officers. I mean, who is your key audience when you go and you sit with retailers? Who are the teams that you're finding are most open to hearing what's new and what's next and how they might leverage that?
well, in this year's journey, that's such a great question, Suzy, because I thought I would classically be working with the CMOs,
Mhm.
data analytics team. And what has ensued is I've ended up doing a very deep dive into chief merchandise officers as a result of a few projects I've had on the go, which has been fascinating and an area under tremendous disruption and change because they are sitting on the largest data set that drives inventory turn and success for the organization. Yet it is the domain of Excel spreadsheets.
Yes.
So I've just found that area fascinating because if we think of the world we live in, Suzy, and the podcasts and the conferences we go to, a lot of the messaging is truly designed for CDO, CMO, CEO. So I found this fascinating and have spent quite a bit of time there, more, I would say, in the past couple of months. And then people leaders. So the US does a great job. You've got people like Ron Thurston talking about retail as a career, unique messaging around uh, people in retail because hourly workers, HQ, the evolution there, the skills training, the credentialing, how do you create a career in retail? That's been nascent in our market. And so I've been doing quite a bit of work there. And also this rise that was made very real for me yesterday, in fact, around retail crime that I didn't think was actually happening here, but it's happening here like you've been experiencing in the US. And these people leaders, this is a new area for them as well, and the consideration for their people and how to protect them.
So just for clarity for our listeners, I mean, so here in the US, I mean, the acronym we say ORC, organized retail crime, shoplifting, which has been shoplifting is the number one cause of shrink actually in for grocers. And every company I've worked with, but I, in any of my president or CEO roles, whether from San Francisco to Seattle to Cincinnati, it is the biggest hurdle that we have to find a way to fight back. I mean, it's the biggest challenge, pardon me. So there's always a combination of technology and then human resource training, some balance between those two factors to try to help us with that. But you're right, in Australia, it's been some time since I've worked for both Kohl's and Woolies. It's been some time since I was there, but I would certainly say that was never on our radar then. But what you're talking about is that that's starting to come to the fore now.
Yes, absolutely. And we weren't prepared for it, quite frankly. There's been some curiosity in looking at the US, and I know I was doing some briefings there back in my Microsoft days and some interesting work with NVIDIA of how we could think about technology to prevent it. We've seen some incredible providers from this part of the world, out of New Zealand, in fact, Aura, doing some very interesting things and getting traction mainly outside of this part of the world. But we're feeling it here. And then there's also the customers that are the inverse of CLV that you don't want shopping in your stores. That's become a provocative conversation because coming out of COVID, there was a lot of angst and customers going in and just not treating employees
Well,
fair. And so it's raised this whole other discussion of how can we look at, frequent returners, people who are coming in and causing issues in our store. So it's been quite a journey this year, unexpectedly. So it's definitely taken me out of this classic domain I thought it would, and addressing new and evolving areas within this market that you're probably also experiencing in the US as well, but we actually really hadn't been dealing with prior to COVID.
Oz was a bit isolated and kind of cocooned, I think, from some of those
Yeah.
things coming out of COVID. And I did a post a couple of weeks ago that, right now, Australia is still, you're following the US. You're about 3 or 4 months, maybe six, it's going to depend on trailing us on inflation, on the softening of inflation. We have yet to come into a deflationary period here in the US, but inflation has stalled and indeed some core commodity pricing has come down, which is terrific. You all are but a few months behind, just following that curve. But the same thing that we experienced coming out of COVID and having this, once in the last 40 years spike in inflation has caused a lot more retail crime. So I would imagine just more people doing it tough. That's also impacting the Aussie, economy, also in the Aussie, retail shopping environment. So I feel for you, but luckily, if there are people like you who are pioneering leaders. I mean, I think maybe it's a blessing in disguise a bit that you're where you are now because you're able to get much more granular in the day to day and understanding of the day to day operations of retail. And now you can help shepherd in some of the technologies that I think are going to speak to those.
Well, and Susie, you touched on a really interesting point that's starting to come up. So we're prepared and used to dealing with inflation, and that was an opportunity for price increase and building in some margin. What's come up more recently is how do retailers prepare for deflation?
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to take that on as a new area, maybe. So I've realized, oh, okay, this is kind of fascinating because how maybe the people really thinking of their strategy, they haven't had, this is setting a precedence. This is going to be a new area. So I think we'll see a lot of discussions ensue around that. And maybe we look to markets like Japan for inspiration.
Yeah, well, they've been living this for a couple of years now. But you're spot on, Marcy, because you know, inflation is tough. It's tough on all the markets. It's tough on retailers in a sense because what we have to do whilst we're in the midst of high inflation is still convince the customer that we're on their side, that we're not taking more than our fair share, we're only rising prices as costs go up. And that's a very tough sell because it's a very skeptical audience, as we all are. But coming off of that, you're precisely right. Retailers have to focus on this, not just the size of the basket, which during inflationary times they tend to do that. They say, well, my average basket value has increased. That's fabulous, but actually, unless the units are growing, you're going backwards. You haven't paid for it yet, and that's what grocers here in the U.S., North America, and the Europe, that's what they're already experiencing. So everything you're talking about, AI, generative AI, I'd love to have you get your thoughts on that. How can we use all that to every day create better category management, programs and platforms, combine that with all the customer data analytics. She's talked about lifetime value. I have to intimately know and understand my customer, so that I can not just understand what their needs are today, that I can predict the future. And if I can do that, hopefully I can maintain the right assortment to continue to drive the same or more items into the basket so that I can weather the inflation and the deflation. Anyway, I just brought up 4 different topics, but you touched on a minute ago. Maybe talk about Gen AI, what you're seeing emerge there in the retail space in general. And I think you did a post recently on BeautyWise AI. I'm super curious if
Mm.
that tags into that also.
And that's more the shopper experience. So that's a great use case where it's offering those suggestions. It's removing some of the friction. I believe that Adore Beauty is using that here, and they have been effectively a pure play in the Australian market of online, although there's some rumors they might be going physical. And they've had a very tough competitor because the brand Mecca here, who I love and admire, and I'm in their top tier program, which is amazing. They've had to compete against them. So they've gotten very creative, not only in their brand partnerships, but their experiences in this online environment. So I believe that's one of the most brilliant use cases I've even seen globally within the customer experience. So um, they're able to offer, the suggestions and building out your skincare routine and enhance the experience without having to hire a fleet of customer service reps, let's say, offshore. So I think that's a brilliant one. And maybe where we're going to see a lot of the innovation because it's the smaller, more mid-markets that can move quick and have that agility. And my guess there is that they did a great job of being data ready. And I know, Suzy, you're passionate about this as well. It's like you can't even move into experimentation or even any production until you're data ready, you've got your governance in place, you've done a lot of test and learn, and then you can go. And I'm just not sure how many retailers are truly data ready to start experimenting, let alone bring this stuff into live production and understand where the safest areas are to start with.
Well, even Marcy, let's just say they got the basic fundamental structure set in place, and so that they're able to capture data. What I also see is that, okay, they've captured it, but they don't know what to do with it. They don't have the analytics. They don't have the expertise. They don't have the right technology so how do they even understand the data? So, I mean, I'm still, that might sound very rudimentary to you coming where from your background, but there's still so many retailers that say, yep, I've got all this data now, and they stare at it. Well, they don't know how to synthesize it and how to use that data to help them tailor their go-to-market strategy. Does that resonate? Do you see that gap also in your markets?
Yeah, absolutely. In some ways, I feel like we're really back to where we have been for the last 10 or 15 years. The difference is the recognition at the senior level for how important this is.
Yeah.
And now that we've all had a taste of Gen AI, there's even more pressure to be embracing this. Now, how to get ready for it, what that really means, where they should start, that's all happening right now. And why we're seeing the revenue increase from McKinsey and management consulting is all around that, right? But ultimately, they're going to have to do a great job of getting data ready and start, as you said, with the analytics. And then where I've seen too is what's on your scorecard as well. So if you want to start to embrace CLV, customer lifetime value, you're going to have to align your C-level suite, and everyone's going to have to understand, what does this metric really mean? Because now we're looking on a future forecast. We're not looking at a trailing metric. And what are the other things we're going to be looking at on our scorecard? And it could even be a scorecard's got some level of, we need to be doing this much experimentation with some Gen AI, even within so-called, let's call them safer areas, so that our people are actually getting used to this technology. I feel like that's all happening, and everyone's at different stages of maturity, but it's the ones who have done a great job with their data that are in a good position to start to embrace this and test and learn and then go into production.
Can I put you on the spot and ask you, do you have a good business case to refer to? Like, is there a company that comes to mind that you feel like has or is doing a good job of this?
Well, we talked about Adore Beauty. So I like that one because that's actually one that the customer can experience.
Okay.
And that's a great one. I would say that the larger retailers in this part of the world that have been doing some of their own in-house development,
Yep.
as opposed to probably our mainstreams, more mid-market retailer, where they're not going to be developing their own apps, but they've embraced the elements for Gen AI to help with the coding piece, right?
Yeah.
To help with more of those horizontal pieces. So we know that's already happening. They're feeling more comfortable. They're getting their data ready. And then what I'm the most excited about are where the marketing teams can start to do more test and learn. Uh, Things like putting into production uses of Gen AI for that marketing messaging. And I believe someone like Woolworths is already starting to test and learn with this, to think about that personalization within their digital channels and how they can then make that more omni-channel. So they're on their way, and that's being well encouraged. So we see the bigger guys doing that. And then some of the more mid-market ones are using some of the out-of-box capabilities coming with marketing automation or e-commerce and testing that out. So I feel like the bigger guys are moving in. The smaller ones are starting to go more marketing. And then for me, this area around merchandising, I think, is ripe for disruption, but very early stages, but holds incredible potential because they can start to develop their own, I'll call it like a narrow language model, but just with their own data to be their secret sauce, what they know about the customer and transactional data and orders. So for me, that's a real interesting area that I myself am going to push for some experimentation.
Love it. So for companies, and that I think what you just defined precisely your elevator speech, which is what you do. I mean, I think are the person and woven you and your team to help coach these companies on how to move forward. Starting, I suppose, are you agnostic if they're smaller or mid-size, starting with out of the box tech as opposed to building in house? I mean, that's a matter of resources and budget, I suppose. But do you help bring them on that journey? That's what I'm hearing you describe.
Yeah, I think we have to look at their business model. Are they legacy? If they were a newer brand that started up, and we see a lot of this in Australian fashion. There's a lot of PE investors coming in here because we've got fresh brands that were pure plays that are getting a lot of interest overseas. They're kind of ripe for a little bit of disruption because they may not be running that efficiently. They may be fairly well versed to be able to embrace this technology, to do some building in-house or have their own data sets, whereas a legacy that can use out of the box, that's probably better for them to move quick and thinking about their data strategy as well. But for them to embrace some of the Gen A capabilities in the out of the box, they just need to make sure that data is getting into the solutions they choose and is governed. And then they can move quick. And that's going to be better for them. But if it's a very fresh and interesting brand that's getting some investment that has tech in their DNA, they can really start to think about, I might be developing some interesting things in-house that are going to give me some new capabilities. So I really try to unpack and look at their culture. How were they founded? Are they better off to move quick and use out of the box, or do they have some capability where they want to get their own secret sauce?
I love it. I love it. You're the perfect person for that. So you mentioned Woolies a minute ago. I'd be remiss if I did get your take on, something I love the Australian grocery market, as you know. There's something kind of interesting happening there. Brad Banducci is the outgoing MD for Woolworths, and Amanda Bardwell is going to be stepping into that role. So we're going to have a woman running Woolies, I think, for the first time ever. Also, we've got Leah Weckert running Kohl's, and she's doing a fantastic job by all accounts. And then I think you mentioned Meijer also is run by a woman, Olivia. What's her
Worth.
Olivia? Yeah. So that's pretty incredible for Australia, isn't it? I'm wondering, I'm looking for your hot take on that. Is this just happenstance, or do we think, oh my gosh, Oz is sort of leapfrogging forward now and kind of becoming more modern?
Well, I feel like we're quickly embracing change, and these leaders brought new skills that made them more effective in this new era that we're in. They embrace digital, they embrace data. If we look at Olivia Worth, this is very controversial because she was on the board and secured the CEO role because of her prowess with loyalty. And Qantas really trades and is a loyalty company in the currency of loyalty more even than a transport company. And they saw the value in that to drive Meijer as a department store and where they want to go next. And even in the past couple of weeks, we've seen some interesting announcements where they're taking on board a group of brands through the Just Group, which you might know. International listeners may not, but so really a group of pure plays, independent brands now amalgamating. And what does that mean? So I know department stores globally have been struggling. I think Meijer's making a very interesting play in loyalty and acquisition of these brands. And what does that mean to their future? So I think it's fresh thinking and willingness to go where the customer is with these new leaders and the evolving customer. So I'm excited.
It sounds, I'm really excited too. I mean, it's going to, I think, portend some real, hopefully, acceleration of innovation in the Aussie grocery market, which is, gosh, they've had a bit of a tough go this last year. I think they've all the leaders of the Australian grocers have been called up before the ACCC, what, once or twice, or maybe three more often, to talk about inflation and price gouging and all of those things. So it's a very different market than here in the US. Here in the US, the CEOs might get beaten up by the press and the pundits, but very rarely does a grocery CEO call before Congress, which in Australia, being called before the ACCC is sort of akin to that. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts about that, but it's certainly been a very dynamic and challenging year for sure.
Well, that's one of the unique things about Australia. We historically have had a market with a lot of, we call it duopoly, and there will be two key players. we are seeing more competition. So Aldi arrived on the scene quickly, stripping out a lot of the market. So we are getting more competition. We need more competition. Um, maybe we're going to see some expansion from some of these guys moving into other markets. That's why I love going to Singapore for APAC there.
Yep.
Oh, look, I believe in more competition. Hopefully, we're going to see some change in our own government, but they're accountable to shareholders. I'm a huge fan of Brad. I was really disheartened to see what happened in the press.
Yeah.
And those are some cultural changes I would like to see here. And I think we're going to see it happen. But anyone who's been working with them knows that they got to run a business. They have to make a profit. We're not in a 1950s communist bloc here. These are not state institutions. So I think we're going to continue to see a push from leaders in the industry, and it will find a way. But that's one thing I really hope for in this market.
I agree with you. I can't agree more about Brad. Yeah, and it's unfortunate circumstances, but I'm excited. Hopefully he'll go on and do something fun and special down the road. So you mentioned before I let you go, I did want to hear you. I know you've recently been to Singapore. You mentioned that, and I think you've had some retail travels to Korea also. Highlights and things you want us to take away from those trips.
That is the growth area in the world. There's something like 5 billion new middle class consumers arriving on the scene. And Singapore is truly at the crossroads. So even though there's only 6 million people there, it's such a vibrant retail scene. There's 177 malls there because you've got this crossroads of Asia. So it was a great place for NRF APAC. And we were able to engage with a lot of attendants from Japan, with China, and really learn about that crossroads. But Southeast Asia in itself, which is close to us here in Australia, where a lot of our suppliers for retailers are located, it just hasn't been a market that we've really moved into. I think we've been quite US or European centric in driving for growth. And the middle class is exploding there with disposable income. And brands like Birkenstock are going crazy there,
Huh.
establishing new manufacturing, seeing incredible growth. So it was fascinating, and they do customer experience so well there. So showing physical stores, knowing there is tremendous growth in omni-channel, but what's the role of a physical store was incredible to see there, and the diversity they cater for. So if you go into any store in Singapore, let's take makeup as an example. They've got to cater for such diverse demographics, right? And they do it well. So they could cater for me, they can cater for someone coming in from Mumbai and even Japan. And I just thought that was fascinating. And that's where we're going in our country and the US, right? These are diverse populations. And I just don't even think that's being catered for in the day-to-day shopping experience domestically. If we look at something even like browser preferences, if
Sure.
20% of the browser preferences shopping here are Cantonese, how many are even delivering that? So
Really
much to learn
great
there.
point. That's a great point about browser preferences. I'm going to make sure I make a note of that. That's brilliant. That's really, really smart. Well, that's great to hear. So you see that dynamic in Singapore and Korea. I've not been to either place.
So Korea, I would even put in a different bucket because that is a part of the world that has its own language and its own ecosystem. So we don't always hear that much about the innovation that's happening there, but there has been a big push in for years with it's called the Hollow Wave. So they've been exporting Korean culture. We know it historically in K-pop and
Yeah.
K-beauty, but I think we're about to see an influx of even more. And Seoul is this amazing city. You feel like you're getting a glimpse in the future. And I haven't really spent time in Japan, but Korea is growth, the rise of the middle class, innovation and test and learn everywhere, and their use of technology in very interesting ways, but even clever launches of new products where the way we go about marketing a product, they can launch something very quickly just by affiliating with an influencer. And suddenly they've got 10 million new people following and buying. So you just see the quick rise of new brands there, and very interesting concepts around things like retail media. And I have never seen execution on pop-ups as a strategy like I've seen in Korea. So I just think it's a fascinating place in the world to go and learn from. And we're going to experience more Korean brands coming to our countries as well. And just within the politics, the way the world's playing out, I think we want to be thinking about other locations for supply chain. And there's a lot of really great trade benefits now between the US and Korea and Australia and Korea. So it's a really great place to think about innovation and sourcing, that's been somewhat nascent, but I feel like people are going there and looking for ideas.
Wow, I love it. Oh my gosh. All right. Well, I'm going to start working on my 2025 retail tour plan. That sounds, I love hearing that because I think you're right. I don't hear anyone in North America really talking about that and why not? So good on you. Thank you for sharing that. Well, I
Yeah,
love
I mean, it will blow you away. It's a glimpse in the future, Susie, because going into some of the shopping malls there, they're just leagues ahead.
Wow. Well, terrific. Well, listen, it's been a pleasure catching up. We need to also have a proper catch up and just hear everything else that's going on in your life because you are always inspiring with what you're leading and innovating and congratulations on kicking off Woven. You are absolute. I think as you have been in throughout your life and career, you're exactly at the right place at the right time with the right experience and expertise. So I'm really excited to see how you go.
Oh, thank you, Susie. Well, hopefully I'm going to see you in the US or maybe NRF this
Yes.
year.
Yes, absolutely. Let's make a plan. We'll stay in touch. And I really, really appreciate you taking the time and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.